What's up, you guys? Welcome back to part 17 of our Firebase real-time chat app series. In this part, we're going to be polishing up our app, which includes things like our app icon, our launch image, and maybe our profile if we do good on time. And we're also going to fix that conversation creation bug we saw at the very end of the last part. It was a very small typo on my part, but either way, we're going to fix it. So the first thing we're going to do before even opening up the project over here is let's talk about the app icon. So the app icon that is shown on the springboard, as the home screen is called, is nothing more than an image. And the way that Apple does it, and also historically has done it, is the developer supplies a icon in a variety of sizes. So the standard size, the largest, is 1024 by 1024 pixels. So what I like to do is just grab an image, and I grabbed the Facebook Messenger logo for our series here. Obviously, this is trademarked, and you can't use it in your actual app. So what I like to do is basically grab an image and just export it at the largest size. So you can edit this in online tools like Canva, and there's a bunch of free app icon creation tools online if you just Google for it. But what I want to use today is Photoshop. I made the investment in Photoshop several years ago, just because of the volume of image and iconography work that I do. But what we're going to do over here is simply drag in our logo, and I am going to resize this a little bit. There we go. And again, this whole canvas is 1024 by 1024 pixels. We're going to hit Command S to save it, and I'm going to put it on my desktop, call it logo. And we want to make sure the type is a PNG. Let's go ahead and save it. Pops up right there. We can go ahead and close Photoshop now. Now, I just mentioned that we want the image in a variety of sizes. So before I knew there were tools that existed to help me resize this that I discovered, I would probably say 5 or 6 years back, I used to go through Photoshop and just export this in all the different sizes. But like I mentioned, there's a bunch of tools that do this for you. The one I've got open up here is called Asset Catalog. I believe it's $3 in the Mac App Store. This video isn't sponsored or anything at all. I've genuinely used this tool probably hundreds of times for all the presets they have. So you can do iOS icons, launch images, watchOS, etc., etc. All you need to do is drag your target app icon, which is that one there. Let's get rid of this one, since that's our core image. And basically what we can do is in these preset tiles, you simply want an iOS app icon image set. Do that, and then hit export. And it is basically going to create this assets folder, which looks awfully familiar to our assets folder in the Xcode project. And it has our app icon image set with all the sizes we need. So the reason I gave it a 1024 by 1024 image here is it's the highest scale, and it can scale down without it making the image choppy or blurry. So now that we have the asset over here, we can go ahead and close this tool, and we can jump into our Xcode project. So open up your folder, let's open up that workspace, and let's bring in that image asset. So to bring in the app icon, go to your image assets. You'll notice that Xcode originally gave you this app icon image set, so go ahead and hit backspace to delete that. Open up the image set folder it gave you here, and instead of dragging this whole thing in, because it basically duplicates this, you can simply drag in the app icon image set, like that. Close up Finder, and you have all these sizes in here now. And it saves you a ton of time, so I'd strongly recommend using one of the free tools to basically create the app icon and resize, or you can invest in one of these desktop-based ones, which is a few bucks. So once you have this set up, you can actually go ahead and hit Command R to build and run. And it's going to take a few seconds since we brought in a few images in that image set, but you'll see, it's kind of fast there, but you'll see the image is now here for our app icon. So looking much nicer. And while we're at it, let's also take care of the launch image. So let me stop running the app here. And under our views and storyboard, we want to go to launch image.storyboard. So back in the day, I would say probably 5 or 6 years ago, Apple still allowed us to use images as the launch image, as in a asset directly. Since then, they've deprecated that, and now we have to create a launch image in the storyboard, which I must say is much nicer. So basically, whatever we put here will be the screen shown in the split second when your app is loading that you saw come in there. So what I like to do is just put some text, maybe our logo. So I'm gonna bring in a new image set here, and I'm gonna call it logo. And we could have used our app icon. I like to create a separate one just so I can distinguish them. So create logo and bring that guy in right there. Go to your launch image storyboard and open up your library. Bring in a UI image view. Drop it on in. Open up the attribute inspector and set the icon, rather the image for said image view, to logo. Like that. Looking good. Now let's just constrain this, so hit that, and then you got to select this little thing down here so we can add some constraints. So let me do that one more time. Let's select this, and what we're going to do is give this a static width and height of 220, like that, and then we are going to pin it center in our container, both vertically and horizontally. So hit that, and then we want to check both of these boxes to be centered in container. And now when we hit Command R, you'll see when the app launches, we'll show our logo. And of course, this is totally subjective. You guys can put whatever the heck you want here. I just put the app icon since it's simple and looks clean. So that's our app icon and image for our launch screen. So let me go ahead and expand Xcode. And let's see what else we'd like to do in this video. So if you recall, we had a bug over here when creating our Firebase conversation. And you can see I just grabbed a messenger icon from Google Images, so you can literally go ahead and do that. But in the database, when we created a conversation at the end of the last part, what was going wrong is in the other user, so the recipient, so this was the sender, Joe, but in the recipient to which we were sending a message, the conversation was being updated to be the conversation ID and not the recipient conversation in the array. And I took a quick peek at where we do that entry. So we do that entry in the database manager. So if we go to the database manager and close this side panel, and a quick tip, you can hold Command Option 0, rather tap Command Option 0 to do the panel close as the keyboard shortcut. But in here, if we go to this function, which I believe is called Create New Conversation, and if we scroll down to that recipient new conversation, this is what we wanted it to include in our conversation array. And if you look here, we do the other user / conversations. We try to pull out that conversation array. And if we have the conversation array, we say conversation, append this. And then I noticed I also spelled this wrong, but at this point I've used it so many places, so we'll just leave it as that. And what we wanted to do is for this child, we want to set that conversation array, but we accidentally passed in conversation ID. So go ahead and fix that variable there. And if we don't have a conversations array, we can simply set that collection with the recipient new conversation like that. So I'm going to go ahead and run this, delete that conversation in the database, and make sure this is good to go. I haven't actually tested this when I was going through it at the end of the last video, so let's cross our fingers. So what I'm going to do is for this user, let's get rid of their conversation. So I'm going to get rid of that. And once that goes away, I'll actually get rid of these two. Why not? We can create them again. Let's get rid of that one. Let's also get rid of that one. And I think Joe's got some conversations too, so let's get rid of his by hitting this. Looking good, looking good. Okay, so now what we're gonna do, let me start up that other simulator because we're logged into, so actually, if I hit Command R, I don't think we should have this conversation in here now, since we just deleted it. So looking good. Actually, before we continue with this, let's set some tab bar icons and change the titles here. I totally forgot to do this. This is such a simple thing to do. So let's go to our main.storyboard, And all you want to do in here is find your root navigation controllers. You can tap on this guy and we can set some icons and titles. So open up that attributes inspector and you can see there's some properties over here. Namely, the one we care about is the title, which is chats, and the image, we can use message. This is a SF symbol, so if you're not working on iOS 13 or the latest Xcode, you won't see it pop up, so just a heads up. And let's also do this one. And I guess this is profile, so we can do like a head image, which I think is called person.circle. And let's go with this one. That one looks nice. And I think that looks good. Let's go back to whatever file we were in, which was this database manager. Hit Command R to build and run. We should have those tab bar icons in there now. All right, cool. So we clearly don't have any conversations, which is a-okay because we're not supposed to. We are signed in with, whose account are we signed in with? There's our image. We're in Joe's account. So let me create another simulator, or rerun this in a different simulator rather. Let's pick this one and let it build. Bear with it a little bit. Hopefully not too long. And there it goes. There's that other simulator, and I'm gonna log in over here with my Facebook, and hopefully it's already signed in. It has my information cached, so I don't have to pause the video and sign in, but we shall see. So let's hit this. We are going to sign in, and okay, it looks like it has it cached. Beautiful. So we're gonna hit this to continue. Oh, just kidding. I totally lied. What I meant to say is it's not cached, so let me pause it, fill it in. I'll be back in 2 seconds. All right, so I just went ahead and signed in with my Facebook over here. And basically what we're gonna do now is we're gonna create a conversation. So I'm gonna say Joe, start something with Joe over here and just say, hey man, how's it going? And we get a new convo over here and we can tap into it and see that message. So let's take a look at our database and make sure we're looking good. So that's what that should look like on the sender side. We care about the recipient side, and this side looks pretty good too. So it looks like that fixed that issue. Now let's take care of some more bugs. So you'll see in users now, we actually have a duplicate user. So that's not good. So let's take a look at why that's happening. And I think that's also related to a typo. In this database manager, there's a function called user exists. And in here, we need to do a few things. The first thing we want to do is, instead of doing the safe email stuff yourself, you can simply say this is database manager safe email and pass in that email. And an issue here that we say is we try to get the child for that safe email, and we try to cast it as a string. But in the database, it's actually not a string. Each user is a dictionary. So what we want to do in here is try to cast it as a dictionary. If we say the string, it'll actually always fail. So it'll always insert that user. So let's go ahead and hit Command R. And let's see what it's complaining about over here. It's saying this should be a let, because we're never mutating it again. And let me go ahead and use the simulator on the left, which is this one. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete that duplicate user in the database once this decides to compile. Give it a few seconds. There it goes. I'm going to delete this duplicate user, and they're literally identical, so it shouldn't matter which one I get rid of. Actually, it does slightly matter. Make sure you never delete something in the middle of a collection, because it needs to be enumerated, and if you're missing a value, Firebase will give some errors for a variety of reasons, so make sure you delete the latest ideally. So let's get rid of that one. And let's sign in with Facebook again and make sure that it doesn't actually create a new user instance. So I'm going to close this, and we're going to reopen it just to make sure everything's clean. Sign in with Facebook again. It's cached, so we can continue. And we successfully sign in, and we only have 2 users now. So that piece is fixed. Now let's take a look at some more functionality that we need to adjust. So we have this conversation here. Let's actually send some more messages in here just so we get a fuller conversation. So we'll say, hey, how's it going on your end? So we can hit send here. And let me send a photo message on this side just so we have some different content types. We'll select one. These flowers look nice. Let's go ahead and send that. So it'll pop up in hopefully a few seconds. There it goes on both sides. So this is enough content. So the next thing we're going to take a look at adjusting / fixing is over here. Let's say I want to search for the same user I'm already chatting with. When I hit this, it opens a new conversation with them. That's not what we want to do because we already have a chat with them and we shouldn't allow duplicate instances of the same recipient chat. So this is actually a pretty quick fix. So we're going to navigate to the conversation view controller and we're going to refactor a few things. The first thing we're going to refactor is go to your table view delegate implementation, and the function you care about is did select row at index path. And we're going to move this functionality into its own function. So we're going to say func open conversation with a model, which is going to be a conversation, and go ahead and paste that code in there. The reason we're going to want this modular is because we're going to want to call this code from elsewhere as well. So there's no point in copy and pasting. And now we can simply do open conversation and pass in the object. Make sure you hit Command B to just make sure things are compiling. Let me stop execution and do Command B in here. Give it a few seconds. Let me actually close and reopen Xcode since it's deciding to be slow, and not syntax highlighting. So go ahead and close, and if you ever hit any weird Xcode issues, just close and reopen them because Xcode loves to cause problems. Now we should hopefully be syntax highlighting. Give it a few seconds. Should be good. Hopefully, fingers crossed. But anyways, while we're building this, there it goes. What we want to look for in here is did tap compose. And this function gets called, of course, when we tap the compose button. And what we want to adjust is the completion handler here. So once we select a user, we want to check if that user's conversation exists in the database already. And if it does, we can open that conversation. Otherwise, we can call this create new conversation stuff here. So how on earth do we do that? Well, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say guard let strong self equals self. Otherwise, we're going to return. This is just a visual semantic. You can still use self optional. I just prefer this. But what we really want is we want a function off the database manager to basically check if a conversation exists with the target recipient where the sender is ourself. So we have this result coming in, and this result has an email property off of it. So we can actually, yeah, let's do it in here. So I was thinking maybe we can do the code in here, but we can keep it in here for now. That's fine. So we're going to go to the database manager and add a function to check if a conversation exists. So come all the way down here, and before this curly closes, this is in the extension, let's add a function called conversation exists with let's call it target recipient email, which will be a string. Whoops. And this is going to give us a completion handler back, which will be escaping, and it'll take a result. And if we find that conversation, we want to return the conversation ID for said conversation so we can open it up. And this whole closure returns void. So the first thing we want to do is get the sender email and convert this to a safe email. So safe recipient email is a database manager, safe email, pass in this guy, and then we can get the sender email, which is user defaults, standard, value for key, email as a string, Otherwise, we're going to want to return. Then we want the safe sender email. And what we want to basically do is say database manager, safe email, database manager, not error, safe email, and passing that sender email. And now we need to query from the database if that conversation exists already. So we can do database manager. So actually, let me back up a little bit. So we're adding this function because, so I jumped ahead a little bit. Basically, we're adding that function because if we delete the conversation here, we want to check in the database if it exists already and open it up. But if we simply try to start a conversation with Joe here and tap on this, we actually already have that conversation ID in this list, so we can reuse that. So let me actually fill out that simpler part of the code first before we start jumping into the database manager piece. So you can leave this as is. And what we want to do in here, we already have the current conversations on this controller, and it is strongself.conversations. And we simply want to get that target conversation. So we can say if let target conversation is current conversations first where, and we want to find a conversation where $0.other email equals the database manager safe email, and this is results.email of what we tapped. If we find this user, we simply want to open up a conversation with the target ID. So we can take all of this crap and put it in here. And basically, this is not a new conversation. Let me get rid of my antivirus pop-up. So we can say this is false. Instead of passing in ID nil, we want to pass in target conversation dot ID. This should be equals. This should be dot ID. This should be the database manager safe email. And actually, we don't even need to use that. What we can use is the target conversation dot other user email. And we want this to be false. We want the name to be target conversation, and this has a name property. And we want to call this presentation off of strong self. Otherwise, if we don't have a conversation, we want to show a new conversation. And this is where we would want to use that database manager stuff. So before we continue the implementation there, go ahead and hit Command R, and let's just validate this piece works. So this is the simpler part. Whoops, we want our existing simulator, not some random one, so let's close that. And up here, let's go ahead and run it in this guy. I think that's the right one over here. So let it build, give it a few seconds, and there it goes. So we already have a conversation with, once it decides to load, sometimes the simulator loves to be slow. So there it goes. So we have a conversation with the browse already, so we can open this up. And if I search for that user and hit this, you'll notice it opened up the existing conversation appropriately as it should have, and not the new conversation view. So that part is good. Same thing over here. So this part is good. So this part, now that we have, what happens if we delete this conversation and we want to start a conversation with the same user again, right? This visually looks correct, but what's incorrect here is if we actually try to send a message, it'll create a duplicate conversation for this side. And the reason is we should reuse the same conversation ID that's going on over here for this conversation, so it doesn't create duplicates. And that's why we were adding the database manager stuff. So in the create new conversation function, and this is why I was considering adding it in this function, what we really want to do before assuming it's truly a new conversation is we want to check in database if conversation with these two users exists. If it does, reuse conversation ID. Otherwise, use existing code. Let's make this the safe email. And let's go back to our database manager and continue that function's implementation that we were doing. So it's all the way at the bottom here, and we called it conversation exists with the target recipient email. We then create the safe email, we unwrap our current sender email, we create the safe sender email. And now what we want to say is on the recipient's user node, so let's say in this case, we want to get their conversations and find if any of the things in the conversation collection has an other user email of the sender, which means there is a bi-directional conversation that exists already in the database, so we're going to reuse it. So it's pretty easy to actually do that. It's just slightly difficult to mentally follow because there's two users involved, and sender recipient workflow is a little confusing, but let's implement it, and I think that'll probably help clear things up. So we're gonna get the node for the safe other user. Whoops. We want the, what did I call it? It's right here. Safe recipient user, safe recipient email / conversations, and we want to observe a single event for the value snapshot in. And in here, what we're going to first do is unwrap the collection as a snapshot.value as an array of dictionaries. And if we cannot unwrap it, we're simply going to do completion, failure, database error, and we're going to say off the database error, if I can spell this correctly, failed to fetch, and we'll return. But if we do find the collection, we want to iterate and find conversation with target sender, which is ourselves. So we can say if let target, or rather let's say if let conversation is collection first where, and if we find it, we're going to return completion, rather we're going to get ID and then return success. Otherwise, we're going to return the same thing, which is this completion failure. If we cannot find it, let's fix that indentation with a control I. And the clause in here that we want to use to find the first element where something is equal is, first we want to get target sender is in $0, which is the nth element we're currently iterating over, other user email as a string, else we're going to return false. And I believe it's called other user email. Let's double check over here. So yes, we did in fact call the other user email. And first we unwrap this other user email, and now we want to return if the safe sender email is equivalent to the target sender email. Let's name these more appropriately. And if that's the case, we're going to get this conversation, which itself is a single dictionary. So then we want to get the ID. So we're going to say guard let ID is this conversation ID as a string. Otherwise, we can go into our else case and return failure. Finally, if we pass all of these checks and everything is good to go, we can call completion, success, and pass in the ID. Don't forget to put a return at the end of this success call as well. And let's see, it looks like this is complaining for some reason. So completion, string, go ahead and hit Command B. Let's see what this error is over here. Looks like target sender email. This is supposed to be conversation. That's what I meant to put here. Don't forget to put return below this, because even if you call success, we need to break execution. Otherwise, it'll come down here and call failure too. So you'll get 2 completion handlers called, which is not what you want. So now that we have this function implemented, let's go into the conversation view controller, which is where we were before, and let's use it. So we commented the workflow we're going to use here. So we're going to say database manager shared conversation exists, pass in the email. This is going to return results, and we want to make sure we say weak self here, and we're going to unwrap self to strong self. And basically we can switch on the results case. If it succeeded, we get a conversation ID. Otherwise, if it failed, it's not really it is a failure, but it's not really a bad thing. If it fails, that means it's truly a new conversation, and we can actually just put this code in here that we want to create a truly new conversation. And don't forget to put this off of strong self like that. And let's see, what else do we want to do? So this looks good to me. And let's copy this code, and we can put it in the success case like that. Don't forget to set this to false. And don't forget to pass in the conversation ID in here instead of nil. And this thing you noticed here, the underscore, we just ignore the error that comes in the error case for the results, since we're not really using it. So go ahead and hit Command R to build and run. And now we should have our things hooked up in a way where it's not going to duplicate the conversation. So let me open the other simulator too and run it in here. Always important to build and run your app's latest changes in both simulators, especially in an app like this where it's truly two-sided. So we open that side up and this side, and we already have this conversation here. So if I go and search for the other user, you notice that off the bat, actually, it even pulled in the prior messages. So for the purposes of this video, maybe this series, we're not going to really look at how to get rid of the old messages. Maybe I'll explain it. So basically, what we need to do here is when we look for the other user, we are in fact getting the prior existing conversation. The reason we're showing the messages here is we're not filtering out the messages that are older than the current conversation creation time. So what we really need to do is over here in each user's conversation node, we might want to include another field that is called conversation creation date. And we can say, once we come into this chat view, we only want to show messages where the date is greater than, rather in afterwards, the creation date. That way you can reuse the same conversation ID under the hood, but not worry about a user being able to see prior messages since they deleted the conversation. So let's just try sending a message in here, and let's hope that this all works because we updated quite a bit of code and I don't want to waste more time. Let's go ahead, cross our fingers and hit send, and boom, we get this over here. We can tap into it, and let's take a look if we have a conversation here. So it looks like we do not. So that's interesting. So we sent a message. So once we send that message, we want to put the conversation back for this user, and we want to do that entry in the sender side. So let's take a look at why that's not happening. So this is Joe's account. So let me go to the chat view controller, and we're going to go to sender button or send button clicked. I forget what it was called. That's what it is, send button clicked. So we don't come into this block because we're not a new conversation. We rather come into here, and we simply say send message to conversation ID, other user email, we pass that in. We pass in the name, which is the title, and the new message. And what I'll do in this message function, in the send message function, we do quite a few things in here. So let's quickly read through what we're doing in here. Basically, first, it looks like we get the proper data we want, the email, the safe email. We get the current messages out of the value of this thing. So we're looking at conversation / those messages, and then we append into there. We do a switch on the type and properly construct the new message entry. We put in, for that child, we put in that new message entry because we've appended it in here. And then after that, the current email / conversation, we are observing that node, and we're basically saying unwrap it. And if we are not able to unwrap it, we say completion is false. But what we actually should do is we should say if we're not able to find this value, we need to create it. Because that user, in their perspective, it's technically a new conversation since they've deleted it. So we would want to create it here. Here's the updated value that it wants. And let's see, what else do we have going on here? So let's see, we're doing a for loop over all those conversations, and we pull out the conversation where the IDs match, I believe. And once the IDs have matched, what we do is we set the value for the current user again. So this part is actually correct, but what we rather want to do, instead of doing a guard, let me take all of this stuff, and this stuff should actually go in an if-else. And the reason we want an if-else, again, is because it might be a new user. So we're going to say if-let, and we're going to get rid of the else here. And we're going to say if-let, we can find this current conversations array. We're going to do all of this stuff. Otherwise, we want to basically assign this value, current conversations. And this is going to be an array of a new conversation. And let's see, where am I putting this value? So we're going to say if let conversations, we can basically do that. Otherwise, so this is basically an array of dictionaries. So let's create another thing here. Let's say var database entry conversations will be an array of dictionaries like that. And let me just instantiate this. And down here we can say in the if-let case, this equals current user conversations. And in this case, we can say this equals an array. And we can put a dictionary in here. And that should be good to go. And we want to make sure this database entry version is used in the set value like that. And if you actually go ahead and hit Command B, things should be compiling now, but we obviously need to fill this out. So let's see what we've got going on. So we want to fill this out, and what we want to fill it out with is basically what we do in the create new conversation function. So do a Command F for that. And what we want to do is basically create this thing. So come back here. You can basically paste that in. Oh, did I not copy and paste it? Let's copy that again. We want this whole thing. And we can drop that guy in here. Put that in here. Let's align these with the Control-I, and let's fill out these values properly. So the ID is going to be conversation ID. I think a lot of these values we bring in as a parameter. So let's come all the way up here, and we see that we have a conversation, a other user email, a name, and a message. So hopefully these parameters are correct. So the ID is going to be the conversation. The other user email is simply other user email. And I'm going to be paranoid and just call the safe email function off the database manager. And the name is name, which I think should be good. Latest message. So latest message, we actually create this up here already with the date string. So we can actually take this update value and let's bring this out here instead of duplicating code. And let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of that line break. And basically we can say, because we have a date is read in message in here, we can put that whole thing here. We enter this, we assign this in this array, and we basically use that for our database. So hit Command B. We still have one more edge case to take care of. And I apologize that this function is so big. It's gotten very, very messy, not even slightly messy. So we're going to review it and clean it up later on. So this else case takes care of the edge case if the user doesn't have any conversations. But if they do have a conversation, we come in here and we try to iterate and try to find the position in the target conversation where we want to do the update. But what happens if this collection doesn't have that position? Basically, we'll never come into here. And we'll just continuously iterate this, and we keep iterating this position, but we don't have a target conversation. So this will actually crash our app. So what we want to do is we want to do a check in here, and we want to say if var this equals this, aka we found it, then we want to do all this code, right? We want to execute all this. And we can get rid of the optionality there, right? And we can also get rid of this unwrap because we already unwrapped it. And we can change this to be this. And if we in fact iterated all of this and we never found that conversation, we know that we need to reinsert it into the collection. So we can actually take this whole thing, plop it in there, and we want to append it to our current conversations. So we can say current conversations, and we're going to append a single element, and this is going to be new conversation data. And then finally, don't forget to assign that to your database entry version of it, like so. And if you hit Command B, and let me just read through this because that was quite some fast copy and pasting. What we're saying is if we find the collection, go ahead and iterate and try to find the position where the IDs match. And ID matching logic is right here in the for loop. Once you find it, assign it to this guy up here, which is declared as optional from the get-go. After that, we then, before we assume we find it, we say, hey, if let that thing exist, you can go ahead and do the updates. Otherwise, we didn't find it. So we know that that user must have deleted it. So create that new conversation data and go ahead and append it as a fresh new entry. And in both cases, we assign the final result of this database entry object. The reason we do that database entry thing is you notice it's outside of the if else. So the scope can be referenced over here down below. So I think that should be good to go in this case. So go ahead and hit Command R to build and run, and let's try to send that message again. So let's hit that simulator, and then let me also change it on the other simulator, which actually is this one right here. And this video's gotten pretty long as well, so maybe we'll wrap up after this. I believe there's one more edge case actually related to this that we will probably need to handle. So you can finally start to see that chat apps have a lot of edge cases, and actually most apps have a lot of edge cases, but Let's look for that other user, and let's go ahead and start sending a new message. Hit send. So we see that message came in over here, but now we also have the conversation over here, and we can once again open it up. So looks like that edge case is now handled. We can close this. We can close this. Let's open and validate they're still there. Beautiful. Looking good, looking good. Now the other edge case that I mentioned is what happens if one user deleted the conversation, but then this side sent another message. Nothing happens over here. And the reason nothing happens over here is basically all of this logic that we did if the sender side had deleted the conversation, we also want to include that on the recipient side. So yeah, like once again, you see we open it and it's not there. So what we're gonna want to do is we did all of this good stuff for the current user email, but we also want to do it entirety, basically copy and paste for the other user email. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's see if I can get away with copy and pasting. So we just got to be careful about it. So we are going to do an if let and then have an else case here. So I am going to let's just type it so we don't break it accidentally. So instead of doing a guard let here, we are going to do an if let. We're going to get rid of the else. Let me stop these simulators because it looks like they are stopped. My computer fan is being unnecessarily loud, but we do an if let, rather an if var to make sure it's mutable. We're going to do an else. We're going to move this value above so we can reference it in both cases, like so. And we're going to take all of this stuff and we're going to paste it on in here. We are also going to create a database entry version. So I'm going to copy and paste that from up here. So you want to grab this guy and we're going to paste it in outside of that if var. We're going to say this is equivalent to this. We're going to use this for the entry. So go ahead and update that here. And we want the else case in a second, but before we do the else case, what we should do is we are going to say if var this equals this, we can do the assignment. So we can bring this in, drop the optional, get rid of the unwrap, and we can also move this whole thing into here. And let's see, target conversation, we can, instead of use final conversation, use the target there. If we're not able to unwrap it, we can say failed to find in current collection. This case is current collection does not exist. So let's just copy and paste it from up here. So I think these two are almost identical. So I think what do we need to do? So we're doing this here. We're simply appending here. So I'm just going to copy this, come down here and paste this here. And we'll fix that up in a second. So let me just copy this other piece. Whoops, we also want this line. And let's copy that and bring that to our else case. And let's read through this code and make sure it's correct. So in here, we say the conversation ID is the conversation. The other user email is not the other user. It's actually the current sender because we're inserting this for the other user email. So we want to say current email. So that's correct. The update value is what we put outside of the if var here. So that'll be the same for both. And let's see, name is name. I believe that should be correct. We might actually have to get the other user's name. Let's just leave that there for now. since that might be a little more hoop jumping than I want to include in this video. So this one looks good, this else case. Let's take care of this side. Let's update this email here. And this is complaining current user conversations. It's complaining because here we've called it other user conversations. So update that. We append in new conversation data, and we update the database entry to other user conversations. So go ahead and hit Command B. Should absolutely not have any errors, hopefully. Go ahead and hit Command R in both simulators. So there's that one on the right. Let's also do it in this one, which is the one on the left, and let's try to send that message. So here we've deleted that conversation from this account, but in this case, we already on this side have the conversation. So if I send a new message, we should see it pop up because we are doing the entry. And beautiful, there it is. And one thing you'll notice off the bat is the name is incorrect. The name is the one from the sender here, and that's not what we want to do, obviously. That's what I was getting at for the name that we're entering in here. This name should be the sender's name. And actually, I think we can fix this pretty easily. Let me just mentally think about that. So we want to not include the other user's name. This is the other user's, the other user that we're sending it to. So this side, I think this side is Joe's account, and we see Joe's name, so that's not right. Yeah, what we want to do, instead of using name here, we want to get the current username. So that's going to be guard let name, guard let current name is user defaults, standard, value for key, because we cached the name. And actually, I forgot we cached the name, so this should be a very quick fix. And if we don't get the name, we are simply going to return. And now in the two else cases, instead of using name directly, use current username and current name there as well. Go ahead and hit Command R to build and run. And I'm going to delete that conversation again from the side. Whoops, hit delete. And let's, not start a new one. We want to send another message. So I'm going to say, this time the name should be correct. And we're going to hit send. And this time you can see the name is correct. So looks like we got our two-way chat working pretty well. We just handled two pretty nitty-gritty edge cases. And we're now able to search for the same user again that we already have a conversation with, and the app is smart enough to know that we don't want to introduce a duplicate instance and to use that existing one. So we still have some work to do, absolutely, for audio messages, dark mode support, and some other quick things along the way. So this is where I'm going to wrap up this part. If you haven't smashed that like button already, make sure to do so for the YouTube algorithm. Subscribe if you're new, helps out the channel quite a bit, obviously. Comment if you have any errors or any issues. I try to reply fairly quickly. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next part.